Hello and welcome to this week's edition of 50 Years Serving the Island, a series of programmes showcasing highlights from the Manx Radio archives during the station's first 5 decades serving the public in the Isle of Man. In 1968, Manx Radio was transferred into public ownership and became the island's public service broadcaster. Today, we're revisiting some of the shorter features broadcast throughout the years. And we'll start with one of the longest running, Kelly's Eye. Presented by David Collister in conversation with Peter Kelly, the series ran for 1,000 episodes over 2 decades between 1989 and 2009. In this edition, Peter and David are focusing on one of the most iconic buildings on Douglas seafront.
Peter, what's Kelly's Eye looking at today?
Looking up today, David. We're in Douglas, if that helps anybody, by the way. We're looking at 4 medallions or plaques set high up on a building. Each one is different. They're in a creamy coloured stone. First one has 2 men standing either side of a shield. Second one, a couple of lions either side of a shield. Third one, a couple of stags either side of a shield. And the fourth one, 2 mermen either side of a shield, and that shield's got 3 legs on it.
They're on a building right in the middle of Douglas Promenade, a prominent building, a building that's been in the news too.
Yes, a palace almost indeed. We're looking in fact at the Castle Mona, or what is now the Castle Mona Hotel.
A fine piece of work though, is it?
Oh, it is. It's obviously different from anything else on the island. To start with, because the stone is not indigenous, it's not quarried from nearby or Castletown limestone. It's brought all the way from Scotland, from small island of, well, reasonable size island, Isle of Arran up in Scotland, brought down in boats. They would come into Douglas Bay, roughly opposite the site at high tide, and throw the stone overboard.
Really?
Oh yes, so there was method in their madness, because as the tide went out, the boat would go out, and those stones would then just be lying on the shore. So down they go with horse and cart or sledge or whatever, and bring the stone up here onto what would in fact be a grass verge at one time. They'd be dressed into shape.
So they'd be dressed here, not brought over as blocks then?
Well, finalised dressing, I think, yes, they would be generally cut into blocks, but certain items would have to be finished on site for fitting. Notice the columns on the front of the buildings. They're a very good example of that type of architecture of the time, and you'll find that repeated in the Catholic Church in Castletown. You'll find it in Lawn House. It's just a style of fluted column. But the plaques, David, they're important because they are not real stone. They are artificial stone, and we're talking of artificial stone going back, in fact, to the latter part of the 18th century. They were manufactured by a lady called Mrs. Code, who had a factory down at Lambeth. The system itself of the Code factory was founded in 1769, and fortunately some of the order books exist, and there is a reference to the Isle of Man. It's dated 1799, and it merely says guard house, and that in fact was for the courthouse and a small prison that was on the end of the Red Pier. Of course it's long since gone, but I feel one of those plaques is actually held, or is one of the plaques held by the Manx Museum. Now, other plaques, we have mentioned them before, is on the Ramsey Courthouse, where there's the Royal Cipher and the 3 legs, but they've been painted over. And in the churchyard at Braddon, there is on the obelisk, the Murray obelisk, another Code stone, in fact Code and Seeley, that was her cousin, who was in partnership with her for a little while, another plaque there, but all connected with George Stewart, because the order books also show that for Blair Athol Castle in Scotland, he ordered, I think it was a horse's head, which went over the stables. But this Code stone was used greatly in London, Bedford Square, and a lot of the eminent places at the time, and also a lot of the large country houses had Code stone used in the front, lions at the doorway and pillars, and I believe the Royal College, Naval College at Greenwich, the hospital, is also Code stone in the frieze within the tympanum of the arch.
They're about 30 feet or more above us, so they're not easy to see, but certainly they look to be in extremely good condition.
They're very good. I mean, think of artificial stone today, and particularly if it's got cement base or concrete base, they tend to lose colour or they pick up the lichen. Yet those, to my knowledge, they've not been properly cleaned at any time. They're in very good nick. The detail is fantastic, considering, well, they were obviously there if the building opened in the early 1800s. Certainly, it's nearly 200 years that they've been up there, and the detail is just fantastic and really does merit people coming and standing as we are here just in the car park, looking up. Bring your opera glasses, bring your binoculars, and have a good look. And of course you'll see the main crest of the Duke of Atholl. They all relate to the Atholls. That's this end one, which has the motto "Firth, Fortune and Fill the Fetters," which is a little bit of Scottish words. Firth, i.e. go forth; fortune, make your fortune; and fill the fetters. And fetters is an old Scottish word for money chest.
In the late 1970s, the island's scenic views were the subject of another series, Howard Hampton's Tales on Rambling. In this edition from 1978, the south of the island is in the spotlight.
Good morning all. Port St Mary, or Port Lamora. Well, we're going to start by going down the High Street a little way, and then down onto the lower promenade and onto the gallery walk over the rocks, running more or less parallel with the High Street. Across the harbour there is the Alfred Pier. It's called after Prince Alfred, who laid the foundation stone. Well, we're going to emerge at the lower end of the High Street, and we'll make our way up the hill towards Perwick, passing Perwick Bay Hotel on our left, also an estate of very posh and expensive looking houses. We'll continue down the steep hill and up another steep and narrow road to Fistard, where years ago there was a mine. We're going to continue along the track parallel with the coast, and then turn right and go up the hill, turn left at the top of the hill, and continue our way along the now grassy track to the chasms. We'll have a look at the chasms, these huge fissures in the cliffs extending the full height of the cliff and varying in width from a few inches to several feet. Now, care has got to be taken in walking at the chasms, because the growth of the heather which partly hides some of the openings. So now, take great care. It's certainly not a place to take children round, not unless you have them on a halter or a lead or something. Leaving the chasms, we'll go over the wall by a stile. You see the paths are signposted, and we'll wend our way over the National Trust ground after having a look down at Sugarloaf Rock, and we'll arrive at Blackhead and Spanish Head and on down to the Sound. Now, what a better place to sit and have our lunch while we can gaze across the water to Kitterland and the Calf of Man beyond. This little island of Kitterland, it's traditionally said to be called after a great Norwegian baron named Kitter. Well, be that as it may. Having finished our eats, we'll start up the road to the village of Craignish, and we can have a look at Harry Kelly's cottage through the window, as it won't be open at this time of the year. It's worth a look in here during the summer, though, if you can manage it. It's very interesting. Leaving Harry Kelly's cottage, we'll retrace our steps a little way, and then we'll take the small road signposted to Port Erin. We won't go very far on this road either before we'll turn right up a little branch road to the top of the Mull Hill. Now, the views all around from here are magnificent, and I'm always reluctant to leave here, but leave we must. Not by the way we came, but carry on northwards, down a hill a little way to the Mull Circle, or Meal Circle. This has a history, but we've no more time about history today, except that it's very unique in the British Isles and possibly unique in the world as an ancient megalithic burial ground. Now, after having a mooch round, we'll run. Yes, run, because it's quite steep and you won't be able to walk, but you run a little way down onto the road, turn right and walk along, taking in all the beautiful views of Port Erin, Bradda Head with Lady Banya and Cronkney Lay in the background. On reaching Port Erin, we'll make our way to the upper promenade and we'll walk to the entrance of Bradda Glen. And we'll walk through the glen to the pavilion, of which I have hundreds of happy memories of my entertaining days, and we'll continue along the coastal path to Bradda Head and Milner's Tower. Now, it's worth a climb up the dark staircase to the top of the tower if you've never been up before, because there's magnificent views from up there too. Be careful as you come down the stairs, because it's very dark, and then you'll come out into the daylight again. And we'll head along the coastal path, not too near the cliffs though, because They're just about vertical cliffs, and we're going to go up and over the summit of Bradda Hill and start a very steep descent down to Fleshwick Beach. Leaving Fleshwick Beach, a lovely little beach, all stones, mark you, that's the worst of it, and we're going to walk along the road to Serby, passing through an estate of modern houses and then down to Ballafesson, then to the Four Roads and so to Port St Mary where we left our cars. We've travelled about 15 miles. We've had some wonderful scenery and we've passed many interesting and historical places. Now next week I think we'll do a circular tour, this time from Peel, so we can park the cars up by the swimming pool end of the promenade. So the usual time then, with your fingers on the map at the east end of the Peel promenade, but for now, so long, you say.
Over the decades, Terry Kringle has presented a number of short features, many touching on the island's history and heritage, including this one, taking a look back over the island's newspaper archives.
Today's paper.
This is Terry Kringle, and today's paper is the TT Special of Monday, June the 4th, 1956. Price sixpence, for which we get a bumper 28 pages. The TT Special has been a today's paper before. It began publication in 1927 and provided highly detailed coverage of the TT races and practices every year. The editor and publisher was a genial former TT rider called Jeff Davison, who was otherwise a motorsport journalist based in Birmingham, and the TT Special was printed and produced for him by the Isle of Man Examiner. This unusual but highly successful paper lasted in increasingly modified form until 1986. Page 1 of today's paper is dominated by a report of the first race in the 1956 TT, the Junior. We learn that it started in bad weather and all the drama was packed into the sixth and final lap. The 1955 winner, Bill Lomas, on an Italian Works Gutsy, was in the lead when he had to retire with engine trouble. John Surtees, on an MV Augusta, took over the lead and then ran out of petrol at the Stonebreakers hut within sight of victory. This allowed the Australian rider Ken Kavanagh, also on a Gutsy, to move in to take a last-minute, unexpected victory. The TT Special reports, sorrowfully, that it is the first time the Junior TT has been won by a non-British machine. It was something of a defining moment. Second in the race was the brilliant young Manx rider Derek Ennett on a Works AJS, whose promising career was to end in a fatal crash off the island. This TT Special would have come out within a couple of hours of the end of the race on the Monday afternoon, and it includes a full list of finishers with their race times and speed, a prime example of the high-speed journalism that made the TT Special the great financial success it was. It was packed with motorcycle-related advertising for manufacturers of machines like BSA, Royal Enfield, Triumph and Ariel. Also Avon Tyres, Castrol Oils and Petrol, Renault Chains, Lucas Magnetos, Lodge Plugs, and Belstaff all-weather clothing for motorcyclists. There are also advertisements for cigarettes, like Senior Service. Riders were often photographed, in those days, after the race, sitting astride their machines, with a fag hanging from their lips, nonchalantly. And so what else is in the 28 pages of today's paper, which is the TT Special of Monday, June the 4th, 1956? Well, there is a full report of the practices that had taken place on the evening of the previous Saturday, the last before the start of racing. There are previews of the next races, the lightweight and sidecar TTs, on the Wednesday. These are to take place on the Clip circuit, and several pages are devoted to photographs of the important parts of that course. There are reports of great TT races of the past, and there are potted biographies of the riders. For instance, in today's paper there's a biog of one of that small cadre of Manx riders who used to take part regularly in the TT and Manx Grand Prix of those days. They include A.R. Kapner, Roy Kapner. He is 27 years old in 1956, and we learn that he started racing in the Clubman's TT in 1951. He rode in the 1956 Junior, and we read in the race report that he finished in 40th place out of 42, enough to send him home with a bronze replica. I am told, and I must apologise if I've been told wrong, that Roy Kapner is no longer with us. We are also treated in today's paper to cartoons with a TT racing theme. There's one showing a disgruntled rider sitting in the road having crashed, and a lady spectator is adding to his obvious discomfiture by pointing her camera at him and asking, "Do you think a 50th at F8 was all right?" And in the advertisements there are line drawings showing young men on lovely new motorbikes, handsome fellows wearing lounge suits, and on the pillion pretty girls in frocks showing their legs. But only a little bit of leg. There is not much titillation for the predominantly male readers of today's paper, which has been the TT special of Monday, June the 4th, 1956.
Today's paper.
You're listening to 50 Years Serving the Island, a series showcasing highlights from the Manx Radio archives from the station's first 5 decades as the Isle of Man's public service broadcaster. Today we're revisiting some of the series of shorter features broadcast through the years. Off the Page featured a series of short stories written by local authors, including the Alf stories, which were written and read by Jack Firth.
You know, old George hasn't been getting about so well since his fall. Well, last week he said he felt he wanted to start moving about a bit and did a fancy an outing. So I said, "Aye, where'd you fancy going?" He said, "B&Q. I said, "B&Q? He says, "Yes, B&Q. I said, "B&Q? What do you want to go to B&Q for? You're not known for being a handyman, are you? Just the opposite, in fact." Well, he said, "Everybody go to B&Q on a Wednesday." "Do they?" I says. "Why on a Wednesday?" "Because it's Pensioners' Day and you get 10% off," he says. "And you meet all your friends, so they tell me." So I thought it might be interesting to see what it's like. I've never been to B&Q either, so we said we'd go. We splashed out on a taxi to take us and arranged for it to pick us up later on. When we got there, he gets a trolley. I said, "What do you want a trolley for? You didn't say you were buying anything." He says, "I'm not buying anything. But you have to take a trolley round. You can't walk around B&Q without a trolley." I didn't argue, not being well up in the ways of B&Q like. So we shoved this trolley round, but look at the bathrooms, the kitchens, the lino, the wallpaper, the carpets. Up and down the aisles we go, nuts, bolts, screws, tools, paint brushes. And every so often George picks something up and puts it in his trolley. A hammer, some draft excluder, a few more odds and ends. He did say he wasn't buying anything, so I decided it's better not to ask. We're just heading to go outside to the gardening department when I spot the great aunts, Marjorie and Violet, coming in from the garden department. They had their heads together, obviously sharing the skeet on some poor unfortunate they'd just bumped into. The tongues were going faster than fiddlers' elbows. I thought they hadn't seen me, so I steered George up the next aisle to avoid them. This confuses George a bit, but that's not hard to do, so I don't worry. I just keep steering him up the aisle and down the next one and then out through the door. We spend a few minutes looking at the plants and the pots and the statues and stuff, but it's a bit chilly, so we go back inside and walk straight into the great aunts. "I saw you scuttle up the aisle out of our way," says Great Aunt Violet. No, I said, "we went up there because George wanted to look at the dustbins, didn't you, George?" And he looks even more confused. It's obvious they don't believe me, so I changed the subject. I asked Marjorie what she's doing with half a roll of wallpaper in her hand. It transpires that last year she papered her back bedroom, and she has half a roll of paper left over. This is last year, mind, and now she's going to do the front bedroom. So she's brought this half roll back to see if they'll give her a refund on it when she buys more paper. Great Aunt Marjorie was never one to let a copper slip through her fingers, but I tell her I think she's going a bit too far with her half roll. I don't fancy chances of a refund. Didn't she being a bit tight like wanting a refund? She gives me one of her looks and goes off in high dudgeon with Violet trailing in her wake. Looks like I've upset her again. Somehow or other I seem to find it quite easy to upset Great Aunt Marjorie. We decide to go and have a look at the light shades and meet George's brother and his wife. A bit dowdy and downtrodden, but very nice people. We've been chatting for a while when 2 young fellas come down the aisle pushing a trolley each, loaded up with all kinds of building stuff and long pieces of wood poking out at the front. They didn't wait for us to move, they came pushing through as though we had no right to be there. Very belligerent they were, so I said, "We're entitled to be here, you know. It is Pensioners' Day." The air turned a bit blue, and one of them muttered something about old Fogey getting under the feet and went shoving off into the next aisle. We finished our chat with George's brother and his wife when we go to look at the doormats. We don't want one, but we thought we'd have a look. After that we wander off to the curtain rails. We don't want those either. And we met little Jack and his big wife. Not long back from their honeymoon. Honeymoon, that conjures up a picture, I can tell you. We were having a nice chat and they're telling us where they went and what they did when these two young fellas appear again. But this time they've got 2 trolleys each, pushing one and pulling the other. Little Jack's big wife takes up rather a lot of room, so after a lot of pushing and shoving and manoeuvring, we make room for them to get the 4 trolleys past us. And the same young fella starts mumbling and grumbling about all these pensioners standing talking and getting in his way and stopping him getting his work done and making life difficult for him. So I said, "Look here, young fella, I told you before, Wednesday's Pensioners' Day, so I'll offer you a bit of advice. If you don't like pensioners, have a bit of common sense and don't come on a Wednesday because the place is full of us, as you may have noticed. And I'll give you something else to ponder on. Just bear in mind that one of these days you'll be a pensioner too." So that's another goes off in eye dudgeon. We say goodbye to little Jack and his big wife and decide the taxi will be here soon, so we'd best make tracks. George starts going up and down the aisles putting the stuff out of his trolley back on the shelves. I says, "George, what are you doing?" "I don't want this stuff," he says, "so I'm putting it back." So I says, "If you don't want the stuff, why do you put it on the trolley in the first place?" "Well," he says, "you feel a bit of a fool shoving an empty trolley round." I thought there's no answer to that. So I went and got the taxi and went home.
Another series of short stories focused on the darker side of Manx life.
Manx Murders, adapted from his book by Keith Wilkinson. Read by Mark Clift. The murder of Elizabeth Betsy Crowe.
Elizabeth Crowe was a 45-year-old spinster who lived alone in a small cottage on the old Douglas Road above Ballure Bridge on the outskirts of Ramsey. Known to most people as Betsy, she had 2 cows and managed to make a living by going into Ramsey twice a day to sell milk. At around 5 p.m. on Thursday the 20th of December 1888, she had walked into Ramsey as usual. Later that evening she had called at the house of a friend, William Kane, whom she had known for about 18 months, where she had taken a meal before leaving around 10:45 p.m. Also out that evening was a sailor called Robert Edward Corlett, who lived in Maccled, about a mile from Ramsey. He had been drinking that evening in the Queen's Hotel with a friend, Thomas Radcliffe. Having left the hotel around 11 p.m, they then waited for a while for 2 friends who had been drinking with them. When their friends failed to appear, Corlett and Radcliffe set off home without them. On the way out of Ramsey, they came across Betsy Crowe and walked with her before she turned off at the old Douglas Road. Her cottage lay about a mile up this road at its far end. William Goldsmith was a labourer employed by Ramsey Town Commissioners who worked at the quarry by the side of the hill at Ballure on the outskirts of Ramsey. On the morning of the 21st of December, he was on his way to work shortly after 7 a.m. and was making his way up the old Douglas Road when he was shocked to find a body lying at the side of it. The body was that of Elizabeth Crowe. She lay on her back with her hands close to her chest. There were numerous wounds to the head and the face was covered in blood. There was marked swelling around both eyes. It seemed clear that the lady had been murdered and the body was taken to the Queen's Hotel at 10 a.m. An inquest was held at 2 p.m. in the hotel to investigate the circumstances surrounding the death of Betsy Crowe. Dr. Gell said that there were about 14 separate wounds on the head and superficial scrapes around the knees. One of Betsy Crowe's close neighbours was John Henry Gelling, aged about 25 years, who lived with his mother and sister approximately 200 yards from Betsy's cottage. It appeared to be common knowledge among some of Betsy's friends that there was ill feeling between her and Gelling. As a result, John Gelling was arrested on the day following the discovery of the body. He was questioned over the weekend, and on the Monday morning following the murder, he was brought before the High Bailiff of Ramsey. The inquest was resumed at the courthouse in Ramsey on Thursday the 27th of December, when Dr. John Gell explained that he had made a post-mortem examination of the body. When he removed the skull, he had found blood on the surface of the brain and also a fracture at the base of the skull. William Skillicorn then took the stand. He said he remembered that on the night of Thursday the 20th of December, John Henry Gelling had been at his house. He said he could not remember what time he had arrived, but was sure that he had left about midnight. John Corlett said that on the night of Thursday the 20th of December, he had been in the house of Mrs. Gelling, having arrived about 10:20 p.m, and Gelling had arrived home about 12:45 a.m. John Corlett, John Gelling and Gelling's mother had then sat up until about 5:30 a.m, when Corlett left to go home. Gelling told the court he thought he had left his home about 9 p.m. and went to Mr. Crystal's house on the Lazare Road. Following this, he went to look for John Corlett and walked as far as East Street before walking to Kirkmackle Street and the Skillicorns' house. He left there at 11:55 p.m. and said he reached home about 12:45 a.m, looking at the clock as he arrived. He remembered his mother grumbling about the late hour and that Corlett was in the house when he got home. He confirmed that he had seen no one else after he had left the main Douglas to Ramsey Road on his way up the Reservoir Road. The coroner began his summing up. He described the death of Betsy Crowe as one of the most mysterious events that has ever taken place in the Isle of Man. The jury retired at 3:40 p.m. and at 5:03 p.m. returned with their verdict, which the coroner read aloud. We find that the deceased, Elizabeth Crowe, was wilfully murdered on the night of the 20th of December or the morning of the 21st, and we further find, from the evidence adduced, that strong suspicion is attached to John Henry Gelling of the said parish. His mother wept on hearing the verdict. On Monday, the 18th of February 1889, John Henry Gelling was brought before His Honour Deemster Gill at Ramsey. But the Attorney General stood and said, "I do not propose to put any evidence before the jury." The Deemster then discharged Gelling. Many years later, in 1923, Mr. Thomas Christian made a sworn statement before Mr. T.H. Midwood, J.P. Mr. Christian, a Methodist local preacher, said, "At the time of the murder of Betsy Crowe, a man who was ill at the time told me that he had murdered Betsy Crowe. He said he was hard up for money and had followed her up the old Douglas Road. He told me he tried to get the money from her, but she resisted and began to shout. He then caught up a stone and struck her on the head, and she fell down. I informed the police, but they made light of it. The man who made the confession to me died shortly after. I am strongly of the opinion that the man who made this confession did so genuinely." The name of the man who made the alleged confession was never published, and today, well over a century later, the mystery still remains.
The Murder of Elizabeth Betsy Crowe, broadcast as part of Off the Page in 2004. And you can listen back to some more of those features, along with other additional content from the Manx Radio archives, online at manxradio.com/portal.